Chapter 928. The Remnants of the Domain Laws of the Hellfire Tyrant. Luo Nan was not shocked. Instead, he was happy. Luo Nan wasn't particularly familiar with things like rules and domains, but he wasn't unfamiliar with them either. He was at the level of, I know, I've experienced it, I have a general understanding of it. But I'm unable to give a lecture. If fighting with extraordinaries and wandering through the misty labyrinth could be considered as experiences on Earth. Regardless, Luo Nan was very interested in these things. He knew that grasping the domain laws and skillfully using them was the threshold he needed to cross in order to raise the level of his configuration ability to the next level. What's more, the stimulation these things gave him was so obvious in the game scene. Moreover, it wasn't just stimulation for Luo Nan himself. When Luo Nan and the members of Mobile Squad 9 quickly passed through this fiery zone, the flow of energy within the unified configuration frame formed by the labyrinth division formation was clearly affected by the dazzling light and the corresponding high temperature. Under the automatic adjustment of the Dynamo Core unit, the squad members, the equipped exoskeletons, the vehicles, and the heavy assault armor all made corresponding micro-adjustments. The machinery bore more pressure, consumed more energy, and weakened the powerful heat radiation of the outside world. At the same time, the relevant personnel needed to ensure the work efficiency of the internalized or mounted Dynamo Core. They had to cooperate in the frame state of their body and soul. This was only on the material plane. What Luo Nan saw on the configuration plane was much more complicated, but it was also much more straightforward. Luo Nan suppressed the urge to chop it. He used a method that was not out of line to observe seriously. But the problem was that the order was just that. On the level of details, no matter how seriously he looked or how much effort he put in, he could not see it particularly clearly. Luo Nan had guessed that it might be due to the limitations of his mental sensing mode when he was far away. But right now, he was riding a light vehicle that simply ran over the fiery zone. The standard battle formation was in direct conflict with the remnant laws of the Hellfire Tyrant. What he could see was still limited. This was by no means the interference of the dazzling light. What truly troubled him was the feeling of fuzziness after the dazzling light. It was like a mosaic patch caused by the low resolution. In short, the picture was blurred. What was going on? Was it the natural influence of the domain laws of the Hellfire Tyrant, or was it the limitation of his observation ability? Or was it a problem with the inner universe simulator? Luo Nan had faintly captured a link that he had overlooked before, but he didn't have the time to do further analysis before the 300-meter canyon formed on the GH-077 infrastructure module flashed past. Just when Luo Nan believed that his squad would directly charge out of the fissure tunnel, the light vehicle suddenly came to a stop. At the same time, Lieutenant Yen Xian issued a tactical order in the squad channel. All the personnel on the light vehicle got off the vehicle. They surrounded the two heavy assault armors and carried out a new deployment. At this moment, the information in the group channel increased rapidly, but it was not chaotic. Luo Nan was currently the highest level of protected personnel. He didn't have any additional missions. The others all received specific instructions in the group channel and dispersed to carry them out one after another. Luo Nan. Luo Nan. Luo. Luo Nan looked around and looked. Nan's Luo. Luo Nan was free for a time. He turned his head to look in all directions, sizing up the surrounding environment. He was a bit surprised. This was because the scene didn't suddenly become clear and bright after he arrived at the end of the fissure tunnel. Instead, the interior of the tunnel maintained a certain continuity. The end of the flaming canyon could not be seen in front of him. However, the material was no longer the special material piled up from the corpses of the plate-building insect. Instead, it was the natural rock stratum of Vanguard Planet Number 4. Right now, the ground Luo Nan was standing on was still part of the Bio-077 infrastructure module. The temperature was quite high, but it was still within a controllable range. However, the influence of the defense configuration of the base's spacetime barrier began to weaken by a large margin. The dazzling flames of the Hellfire Tyrant wreaked more and more havoc. Not only was his line of sight severely obstructed, the ground and the rock stratum on both sides seemed to be warping and melting under the high temperature. There were even some magma-like viscous streams of fire flowing through the cracks in the precipitous walls. At first glance, it looked a bit like the Blood Soul Temple. Correspondingly, explosions, blasts, air waves, fragments, and other battlefield elements had already begun to reveal a greater sense of existence. From time to time, there would be flying devices and flying alien life forms sweeping across the sky above the canyon. Of course, there were large amounts of burning earth and rock that continued to collapse from the flaming canyon. It made one suspect that if they continued forward, they would be buried alive without the need for the enemy to make a move. However, Luo Nan was still able to see the soldiers of Mobile Squad 9 advance into the endlessly collapsing depths of the flaming canyon without the slightest hesitation after receiving orders, even though they were only in exoskeleton light armor. They carried out tactical vigilance and exploration. The soldiers who charged forward did indeed have the support of the standard array. A thin layer of light film appeared on their bodies under the roasting of the dazzling flames, giving them protection. But soon, the figures of these people were engulfed by the flames. Even though the various data representing their states were still normal in the group channel, the visual effect was enough to make one tremble with fear. According to Luo Nan's rough judgment, the lethality of these dazzling flames was roughly equivalent to that of the mush-mouth ape. Their forms were quite similar as well. They attacked the material and mental planes at the same time. Their current explosiveness was a bit lacking, but they far surpassed in terms of endurance and penetrative nature. In other words, these were all B+ rank lethality by Earth standards. But the soldiers who charged forward, all the members of Mobile Squad 9, were at the sergeant rank. They went in when they said they would, without the slightest hesitation. Most importantly, they had indeed realized the ability to survive and maneuver in this extremely vile environment. As for their cultivations, it was really hard to estimate using Earth standards. According to Luo Nan's estimations, the individual combat strength of the relay station's officers and soldiers was compared to Earth's. Ignoring the special circumstances of the mental side and the special characteristics of some soldier types, the sergeant rank was already in between the awakened and the architect rank. In other words, it was on the level between C and B rank. If one were to include the bonus equipment, then they would probably have a B rank fleshly body. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to compare them to the upgraded versions of the Deep Blue Walkers of Quantum Corporation and the Apocalypse Laboratory. Their individual combat strength was already at the level of the architect rank. It was just the difference between B and B+. There were also a few examples. For example, Lu Andy, who was a veteran of 100 battles. Luo Nan found it hard to estimate what kind of combat strength he could display after being equipped with equipment. As for the illustrious nobles, it was said that there would be a bit of a difference in rank and strength, but it wasn't too much of a problem to view them as extraordinary. In this way, there were over 10,000 people in the relay station's defense force. 1 out of 10 sergeants, 1 out of 100 lieutenants, and 12 illustrious nobles. Aside from the fact that the number of extraordinaries was a bit lacking, this single unit was enough to completely crush Earth's side in other aspects. But Luo Nan still had to say that this wasn't the way to look at strength. Purely comparing individual combat strength was completely meaningless. What about weapons and equipment that were countless generations apart? The chat group interface was spread out with a simple diagram of the current situation on the battlefield outside. It was extremely intuitive. From Luo Nan's point of view, it was like he was facing a chessboard. His perspective cut in from the parallel direction of the Chu River Han boundary. The two flanks were the battlefield of intense strangulation. The green dot of light that marked the transport vehicle could barely be considered to be the left edge of the Chu River Han boundary. It roughly crossed the position of the Zhu-Lin boundary and advanced with difficulty. There were still at least 2 squares of distance before Luo Nan and the others could successfully jump out of the chessboard. He knew that this was the real-time monitoring data of the defense state of the base's internal and external areas by Ant Kuei, the highest level AI of the relay station. Those who knew the ropes would naturally be able to obtain the necessary information. Luo Nan could barely be considered as someone who knew the ropes. Aside from this, there were even more intuitive markings on the chessboard. 2 dotted lines extended out from the green dots that represented the transport vehicle. One was to advance along the edge of the Chu River Han boundary, and at the very end of the chessboard, he would enter the canyon area in the center. The other was to directly enter the canyon from where the grid was, and then go straight to the blocking position from the center. Seeing these 2 lines, Luo Nan immediately understood what the officers were discussing and debating about in the impromptu chat group. Of course, he also knew what the final result would be. Sure enough, the conservative route that extended along the edge of the canyon had already been erased in the time it took to breathe. All that was left was the route that forced its way through the depths of the canyon. Luo Nan naturally discarded the data of the useless region. He focused on observing the situation of the space-time barrier in the canyon region in front of him. The chaotic and changing graphical lines gave him a sense of intuition. The rapidly switching numbers were even more callous. Luo Nan wasn't sensitive enough to the latter, but he already knew that this path was absolutely not easy to walk just by looking at the former. He didn't know or care about the other dangers. What gave him the biggest headache was how to deal with the intense conflict between the space-time barrier and the laws of the Hellfire Tyrant's domain. The structural strength of the transport vehicle was a challenge. The maintenance of the transport vehicle's transportation environment was another. Luo Nan quickly flipped through the blueprints, doing his utmost to absorb the key points of knowledge within. His cerebral cortex faintly swelled and cracked. Right when he was racking his brains, Lieutenant Yen spoke in a deep voice, "What's your opinion?" "Me?" Luo Nan was startled, but he knew that he didn't have the time to hesitate. He immediately gritted his teeth and answered, "I need to do an on-the-spot survey and adapt." This definitely wasn't a good answer, but Lieutenant Yen Xian didn't have any other reaction. He just said, "Then let's go. The light vehicles in front are unable to pass. You activate the follow mode and pin down Jia Gang. I'll be behind you." Jia Gang was a member of Mech Class 9. Luo Nan was one of the pilots of the heavy assault armor. He glanced to the left, looking at the steel behemoth that was 3 times his height and 50 times his weight. Luo Nan had already activated the relevant interface on the Dynamo Core program. Naturally, Luo Nan had no reason to refuse. Of course, there were also the nesting and functional relationships of the space-time barrier, the standard combat array, and other large and small configuration systems. He knew that time was of the essence. He simply gave up on the material and mechanical parts and only focused on one. Because of this, the knowledge and information he grasped didn't have a standard to refer to. All he had was the general network of thought that was established on the foundation of configuration, as well as his mind that gradually stabilized. Suddenly, an order pierced into the group channel on Luo Nan's auxiliary AI mission system at the same time. It included the corresponding authority and signal link. And the most core sentence was, "Get in the car." Actually, even if he made a mistake in his execution, Lieutenant Yen Xian, who had been following him like a shadow, would certainly be his final insurance. Luo Nan was able to clearly sense that Lieutenant Yen Xian had already chased him to a distance that was within arm's reach. Luo Nan could exert his strength from behind at any time. Rookies really don't make people feel at ease. The corner of Luo Nan's mouth cracked open behind the metal visor. His state of mind became increasingly clear. He began to silently count in his mind, using the rhythm of the Earth's countdown, 2, 1. Dodge. Yen Xian, who was behind Luo Nan, suddenly changed his orders. Luo Nan, who had already begun to twist his waist to exert strength, was forcefully knocked down by the steel body charging at him from behind. And the already tall and sturdy torso of the heavy assault armor in front of Luo Nan swelled up several times in this instant. Its two arms came together with a bang, and its mechanical modules deformed to prop up a large shield of considerable surface area. It protected Luo Nan, Yen Xian, and the other two squad sergeants who had alertly pounced back. Luo Nan plunged head-first into the loose yet still burning layer of rubble. He couldn't see anything. But he still maintained a connection with the transfer vehicle. So he was able to clearly sense that the transfer vehicle, which had been about to finish adjusting itself, suddenly suffered an extremely powerful artillery strike from the rear. The penetrative power and explosive power of this strike were tyrannical to the extreme. Nearly a fifth of the metal outer shell, baffles, and spare parts of the rear of the transfer vehicle were blown into smithereens. At the same time, there were at least 3 human bodies, or broken limbs and fragments. The transfer vehicle lost control in an instant. The real-time information Luo Nan received clearly showed that the vehicle's kinetic system was in disorder. The forceful braking had reduced the momentum of the vehicle's fall, but it suddenly increased explosively. The vehicle plunged down diagonally from midair, smashing into the rock layer at the other side of the canyon. The body of the heavy truck, with the momentum of the fall, dug almost 3 meters deep into the wall, but it was also crazily straightening itself. Pushed by the uncontrollable power, it was like a blunt knife that cut an extremely deep crack in the burning wall. Then, it pushed against half of the rock stratum and moved forward with a loud bang. Its direction was still toward the blocking position, but this way, it perfectly missed Luo Nan and the others, who were coming over to provide support. Luo Nan subconsciously wanted to get up when he saw this situation, but Yen Xian, who was pressing down on his shoulder, didn't say a word. He gave Luo Nan a clear downward force, stopping Luo Nan's movements. In the next instant, Luo Nan saw through the monitoring equipment of the transfer vehicle that smoke rose from all over the canyon. Some abnormal colors were cast down from above. The color was a relatively dark yellowish-green ball of mucus. It caught fire the moment it came into contact with fire. Smoke rose everywhere, and it rapidly accumulated to a certain density before exploding with a rumble. The dazzling flames that were burning on the rock layer exploded into a rain of fire that filled the sky. This rain of fire would burn and corrode a hole in the blink of an eye as soon as it landed on something solid. Moreover, there was a second explosion. It was extremely sinister. Luo Nan's side was able to evade in time. He had the heavy assault armor blocking the outermost layer. The defensive power of the array was effectively concentrated, allowing him to avoid this disaster. It was just that the surface of the armor controlled by Jia Gang had suffered quite a bit of damage. But on the other side, the transport vehicle had already suffered heavy damage. Its defensive power was clearly lacking. After this rain of fire, it became riddled with thousands of holes. The sinister flames that had been catalyzed were impossible to extinguish as long as they burned. The flames followed along the outer armor of the vehicle body, continuing to spread and permeate. In the short span of a breath, the transport vehicle had truly become a train. It was like a raging burning ball of fire. It launched a desperate charge toward the fissure tunnel several hundred meters away. "Let's go." This time, Yen Xian forcefully pulled Luo Nan up. Then he exploded into action, reversing his direction. He charged like a hurricane on this side of the canyon in an attempt to catch up to the transport vehicle, which was wrapped in flames. Luo Nan used his own perspective to quickly survey the surroundings. He saw a series of muffled collisions. It was similar to the cannon fire that had fiercely struck the transport vehicle before. The collisions smashed into the two sides of the rock walls. Every collision caused smoke and dust to fill the sky. Shock waves crisscrossed back and forth, pounding people's lungs and causing their skulls to shake. Shadows streaked across the air above the canyon. There were at least a dozen or so low-flying flying vehicles and even more pterodactyl-like vicious creatures. They whistled and pierced through the air in a form of collision. Quite a few of them turned into fireballs in the first instant. Armored soldiers jumped out of the vehicles and fell to the edge of the canyon. Some even fell to the bottom of the canyon. As for the pterodactyls, they were the main culprits that had spat out the acid bombs. They suffered quite a bit of damage right now. Fortunately, they weren't able to drop a second wave of catalyzing poison that could have taken their lives. There was also an enormous beetle that was the size of a heavy tank at the edge of the canyon. It was unknown when it had surged up, but it fell down like dumplings. Its enormous size was simply a devastating disaster for the already fragile canyon. It gave people the feeling that hundreds of thousands of square meters of earth and rock had collapsed in the blink of an eye. Luo Nan had seen the acid pterodactyls, the assault beetles, and the monsters that carried out the long-range bombardment during his offline testing. He had been in the game for a long time, and he understood that these were the servants of the magnetite mica jellyfish. They were terrifying monsters that were created under the dual effects of magnetization and stitching. There was also the hellfire tyrant that was still in a corner of the battlefield. It was extremely likely that this was the result of the third and most mysterious ability of the magnetite mica jellyfish, the dimensional gate. This was the might of a senior monarch-level magnetite mica jellyfish. He was thinking too far ahead. But these things before his eyes were undoubtedly attracted by the transport vehicle. The intensity of their battle had already exceeded the norm. Even with Luo Nan's relatively meager knowledge, he was able to determine that this represented the tyrannical senior monarch-level life form that occupied the clouds. It was currently casting its attention in this direction. There was no doubt that the base was mobilizing troops as well. But the space-time fortress was damaged, and the front lines were in a state of chaos. The response was inevitably a beat slower. Right now, the natural rock layer region of the blazing canyon was close to the Bio 077 module. It was on the verge of collapse. Not only were the flames of the canyon not extinguished under the surging flood of earth and rock, but they exploded once more. Though they didn't turn into a rain of fire, the impact force was still extremely tyrannical. Luo Nan, who had already turned back at high speed, felt high-temperature flames pounce on his back. His exoskeleton armor was about to melt. At this time, metal clanged. The heavy assault armor that Jia Gang piloted was like a sturdy wall. It forcefully inserted itself between the gushing flames and the retreating Luo Nan and the others, isolating them from the high temperature and the shockwave. On the other side, the other heavy assault armor did the same. It protected the other light armor infantry of the squad, blocking at least a portion of the attack. In an instant. Then, this temporarily formed defensive array was wrapped up by the dazzling flames and shockwave of the explosion. It was on the verge of collapse. And after the impact of the raging flames, an even more deadly and vicious enemy was about to attack. Luo Nan couldn't pay attention to the surging heat wave behind him. He just stared fixedly at the transport vehicle in front of him that was already beyond recognition. The maintenance plan that Go Yi and Xian Zhu had prepared in advance had long since become a pile of meaningless symbols under these circumstances. Most of the information that Luo Nan had forcefully stuffed into his brain was about to be turned to ash along with the flames wrapping around the vehicle. Yan Xian was still leading Luo Nan in pursuit, but he didn't have any effective orders. It was easy to imagine that the impromptu conversation group he was in certainly didn't have any clear plans. In fact, under these circumstances, it was unknown whether or not the freezing device, which had harsh requirements for maintaining the environment, would still be working normally. No, it was still working. Luo Nan's breathing grew more and more hurried as he madly sprinted to his limits. At this moment, his brain was constantly refreshing the real-time monitoring data of the transport vehicle, even though it was becoming more and more incomplete, more and more blurry and chaotic. Speaking of which, this wasn't much from Luo Nan's perspective. He wasn't an expert when it came to the mechanical structure of the vehicle. His true domain of superiority lay in the level of configuration that was above the material substance. In Luo Nan's eyes, the core configuration of the current transport vehicle was extraordinarily complete. Perhaps this description needed to be extended to an even broader domain. Chapter 931. Luo Nan's consciousness grew all the more lively under this pressing situation. He tried to polish the judgment in his heart a bit more clearly to inform Yen Xian, Go Yi, and the other superiors. But before he could form words, the transfer vehicle in front of him, the transfer vehicle that Luo Nan had determined to have a complete core configuration, loudly disintegrated from the intense collision and friction that continued for several hundred meters. The transfer vehicle even formed a muffled explosion the instant it disintegrated. The bursting wave of air blew the fragmented body of the vehicle out from the rock wall it had cut into. The outer shell of the vehicle split into pieces, and the parts and fragments filled the sky. There were even human figures bursting out from within the vehicle. Luo Nan's eyelids twitched violently behind the metal visor. He also felt some fluctuations in the mind of Lieutenant Yen Xian beside him. The frequency at which Lieutenant Yen Xian's head swayed left and right clearly increased. It was clear that Lieutenant Yen Xian was intimidated by the situation before his eyes and was somewhat distracted. Of course Luo Nan was affected as well. The situation he saw with his own eyes and his deeper perceptual judgment formed a solid collision. But soon, his brain won over his eyes. His mouth was a step ahead as he gasped for breath and hissed, "There's no problem with the freezing device." Lieutenant Yen Xian tilted his head to the side. Then he gave an unexpected answer, "Yes, there's no problem." Ha! Luo Nan's psychological analysis of Lieutenant Yen Xian was clearly wrong, but his most crucial judgment hit the bull's eye. After the aftermath of the explosion dissipated, the situation became increasingly clear. It was true that the transfer vehicle had exploded, but its core, the cabin that carried the freezing device, was still basically intact. At most, it was a bit blackened by the smoke and fire. Instead, it seized the opportunity to break free from the insidious flames catalyzed by the pterosaur's acid bomb. It also broke free from the negative effects of the vehicles completely out of control. It relied on its own miniature power pump to continue advancing towards the blocking position in a maglev state. Though its speed was 2 levels slower, it was much steadier than before. As for the human figures bursting out from the explosion, they had clearly taken the initiative to break free. 7 or 8 of them were either calm or in a sorry state, but they all landed safely on the ground. They just so happened to rendezvous with Mobile Squad 9, which had been pushed over by the surging heat wave. The battle formations of both sides instantly adjusted to their positions, harmonizing as one. And then, everyone continued running with large strides. There was nothing he could do about it. This kind of investment seemed to be enough to carry out a few waves of assaults against the assault position ahead. In fact, the assault position had already entered a state of war. They had begun to execute the assault mission. Luo Nan divided a portion of his mind to pay attention to the battle situation, but his thoughts were not chaotic. Instead, his thoughts became clearer and clearer. The spare parts and toolboxes were already in place ahead. To the side, the outer cabin of the maglev propulsion frozen alive installation was already a short distance behind them. It was even easier to calculate ahead of time. He could faintly feel Lieutenant Yen Xian's gaze turn over. This was a critical juncture where he needed to make a move. If Luo Nan did not react in time, Yen Xian would do the same as before and make the decision for him. This time, there was really no need. Luo Nan exhaled and inhaled from behind his visor. He sent out a message in the group channel, "Prepare to dock." This time, he did not count down. He directly exerted force after the preparatory work was completed. The exoskeleton armor that covered his entire body gave him an even greater restraint. Actually, the expansion and contraction of the muscles of his entire body formed an even more explosive force that propelled him to the side and forward. In the end, Luo Nan was not a true rookie recruit. Even though he had never experienced a battlefield like this, he had crossed swords with all sorts of people on Earth. This experience was enough to temper his judgment and action power at critical junctures. In this moment, the state of the outer cabin of the frozen alive installation, the state of the squad, the state of the spare parts box ahead, and his own state all appeared in his mind in a configuration mode that was detached from the substance. The configuration mode continuously refreshed and changed. Whether it was calculation, prediction, or intuition, there was nothing wrong with Luo Nan's ejection trajectory, and the forward path of the outer cabin of the frozen alive installation converged in an instant 20 meters ahead of him. It was at the midline of the canyon. And there was precisely the location of the spare parts box that had been launched over. Luo Nan took the first step and unlocked the privileges of the spare parts box through the air. He controlled this box made of special materials and placed it flat on the flame-covered ground. Luo Nan, who was suspended in midair, waited for a moment in this position. The belated outer cabin of the frozen alive installation passed through the top of the spare parts box and collided head-on. A muffled sound rang out as the spare parts box accurately adhered to the bottom of the outer cabin of the frozen alive installation. At the same time, a data link was realized. As for Luo Nan, he had already obtained the relevant privileges earlier. Right now, he displayed his usefulness. The outer cabin of the frozen alive installation, which was completely in the state of a lump of iron, opened a door in front of it. Luo Nan shrunk his body and rolled, smashing his body inside. Luo Nan's ears buzzed and vibrated in this moment. Then he collided with a layer of nothingness, an air buffer membrane. He spun a dozen times in this not-so-spacious area, and the powerful momentum was digested. It was just that Luo Nan couldn't control his body's balance too firmly for the sake of ensuring the relative stability of his brain and lungs. The air buffer membrane disappeared, and his shoulders and hips smashed onto the floor of the carriage with a bang. Luo Nan didn't have any other reactions aside from gasping for breath. At most, he took the opportunity to test the state of the spare parts box through the floor. Then he propped himself up and looked out the only side window. He saw Lieutenant Yen Xian's figure shoot back at high speed from outside. Clearly, he had already returned to the front lines of battle. Luo Nan's gaze turned back. It was unavoidable that his gaze was attracted by the translucent frozen alive installation at the center of the cabin. The person inside that had entered a frozen alive state seemed familiar. Whether it was the tall and astonishing torso, or the malevolent metal prosthesis that blended with flesh and blood on its cheeks, it gave off an extremely deep impression. Luo Nan had seen this person 2 days ago, that's right. This was one of the high-ranking officers of the relay station, the commander of the elite mobility force, Sir Shi Yuan. Hold on. If this person was here, then who was the one resisting the Hellfire Tyrant on the front lines? But no matter what, it was getting closer and closer to the blocking position. From beginning to end, the spare parts box and more than half of the modules and accessories inside did not enter the cabin. They had already completed their mission. It was nothing more than a single-use propeller. His train of thought is so crude and straightforward that it's scary. Lieutenant Xiang Min's hoarse voice could still be considered steady, but speaking these dispensable evaluations proved that there were fluctuations in her state of mind. The instantaneous acceleration just now pushed Luo Nan directly to the rear of the cabin. He slammed into the cabin wall with banging sounds. He chuckled twice. No matter what was said, this simple single-use propeller allowed Mobile Squad 9 and the escort personnel to move the depth of the battlefield by a large margin into the Base 077 infrastructure module. They were already under the protection of the blocking position. They wouldn't need to engage in a life-and-death struggle with the assault beetles. This could pull back many people in an instant. Of course, Luo Nan also knew that the core of his mission this time was to ensure that the important person within the freeze-to-life installation was still Sir Shi Yuan. He had to transport him back to the blocking position in a stable state and then transfer him to the interior of the base. From the looks of things, it was still relatively stable. The explosive power of the single-use propeller was still within the range that the outer cabin of the freeze-to-life installation could bear. Though Luo Nan's plan was crude and straightforward, it had a relatively reliable basis. Luo Nan was not prepared to explain in detail to Lieutenant Xiangmin. After all, the vanguard of the assault beetles was still 100 meters away. The enemy's aerial and long-range attacks could regroup at any time. Now was far from the time to chat. After laughing twice, Luo Nan struggled to get up. He organized the tools and spare parts he had just protected and began to reassemble. Luo Nan's position at the rear of the cabin was getting closer and closer to Lieutenant Xiangmin. Without the obstruction of the freeze-to-life installation, they could look each other in the eye when they raised their heads. Of course, they could only see each other's exoskeleton armors. Lieutenant Xiangmin sat in a semi-concave corner at the edge of the cabin wall. She bent one leg and extended the other. Her posture looked rather lazy, but she was actually controlling the injuries on her waist and abdomen. It was a rather heavy injury. Luo Nan only shot a glance in that direction before lowering his head to do the work in his hands. He needed to check the state of the freeze-to-life installation and perform a signal link. He needed Lieutenant Xiangmin's authority, and the other side cooperated without any hindrance. Luo Nan's current work was different from his previous capricious disposable propeller project. He realized that the freeze-to-life installation was a necessary prerequisite for the docking of the interface between the freeze-to-life installation and the sniper position. Xiangmin could certainly understand what he was doing. More importantly, if the transport vehicle had come over in one piece, then this wouldn't have happened. The outer cabin of the freeze-to-life installation had traveled nearly half the distance through the crack at the front of the GHI-077. Luo Nan's adjustment work was more or less completed. Most of the most important work was already completed. Luo Nan could finally shift his attention to Lieutenant Xiangmin's side. He observed her injuries and evaluated whether or not she was competent in the transfer work that was about to be carried out soon. Xiangmin's gaze had already rested on Luo Nan's body for a long time. She spoke with a hoarse voice. Go Yi and Xian Zhu didn't have much use. How did you discover my injuries? I figured it out from the configuration. Luo Nan didn't have the energy to pretend anymore. He spoke the truth. Right now, whether it was the freeze-to-life installation before his eyes, or Xiangmin who was bound to the installation, or Mobile Squad 9, Go Yi, Xian Zhu, and Liang Lu, who were linked to his array one after another. Of course, this included the ceaselessly approaching sniper position, the various officers and soldiers on the position. He could even extend this to the front lines of the battlefield and even the entire relay station system structure. Everything was in the form of a configuration. It existed in his cognition, only in detail and in rough form. Luo Nan could faintly sense that the several thousand nodes on the battlefield formed a standard battle array. Even though nodes were constantly dimming and disappearing, the grand system formed from them still forcefully established a common order that belonged to the Heavenly Yuan Empire's army within the violent and chaotic battle situation at the front lines. The overall situation was like this, and the details were also like this. He was temporarily in Mobile Squad 9, and he was currently in the outer cabin of the freeze-to-life installation. Whether it was a person or an object, they were all a part of this common order. Even though the circumstances they faced were more or less different, they were able to draw support from this common order to forcefully dispel a portion of the pressure. They could erase certain chaotic variables and obtain a powerful reinforcement that far exceeded their individual strength. Correspondingly, they also had to obey the basic principles of this grand system. They had to construct a tight collective domain to form a stable battle fortress. Understanding this rule allowed one to rapidly judge and grasp many changes within the system. Of course, Luo Nan was far from being able to see through the ultimate rule. However, the real-time state of the freeze-to-life installation, the severity of Xiang Min's injuries, and the changes in the battlefield situation within a short period of time were all within the scope of his knowledge. He laughed and walked to the side of the freeze-to-life installation. He extended his hand and pressed lightly on the translucent cabin cover. He turned his head to look at Xiang Min. "Lieutenant, you're deeply bound to this installation. You're using the dynamo core to realize control, and you're drawing support from the standard array to ensure the stability of the environment. But the leeway you've given yourself is too small. Right now, you need to share some of the pressure." Just from the distance, success was already at hand. But Sir Shi Yuan was in a frozen state. He couldn't hold on, or perhaps the device's transfer was unsuccessful. Everything in front of him was for naught. Luo Nan subconsciously held his breath. It was unknown how many people were the same as him at this moment. Then, he heard Lieutenant Xiang Min sigh in relief with his own ears. She turned her head to look at him. Her metal visor was ice cold, but her voice was warm. "The tool is an extension of the human body. The human body is also an advanced form of the tool. Only the soul is in control. You're quite classical." Luo Nan still wasn't too clear on the classical definition of the heavenly Yuan Empire. He could only laugh foolishly. Yeah. Xiang Min's gossip proved the effectiveness of Luo Nan's plan and execution. Perhaps the entire blocking position let out a long sigh of relief in this instant. The work entered a stable state. The vertical collar chip on the back of Luo Nan's neck endlessly transferred data to the blocking position's transfer and maintenance module. Lieutenant Xiang Min had something similar, but it was only limited to the freezing live device itself. It was also the core of all other designs and equipment services. Luo Nan didn't need to worry about it. The AI system established a real-time correspondence between these data for the executors to refer to. Luo Nan's authority was expanding, and he was exposed to more and more information. This included a portion of the base taking the initiative to open up to him. But at the same time, there were a few more subtle things. They gradually appeared as he operated special operations that hovered on the line of compliance and violation. The range and depth of Luo Nan's senses were both expanding. He still couldn't wander into the void as he pleased. But in this environment, where the dynamo core was the central axis that linked people and objects together, possessing a solid material foundation and a unique array system, his mental senses seemed to have a place of use. Especially the rapid absorption, digestion, and analysis of complex information. This was Luo Nan's forte as a psychic. Gradually, Luo Nan's consciousness began to drift. The restrictions of the special environment were a bit loose. It was as if he had pushed aside the fog of war in the front lines. He was able to observe and appreciate the formatted space constructed by the standard battle array. No, it was the bloodshed field, the myriad of formations and evolutions. Although the vast majority of the changes followed a pattern that Luo Nan could understand, the bloodshed field was able to realize an even higher level of operation by relying on these basic patterns. Needless to say, even a part of it was able to ascend to a higher level in a short amount of time. It was able to contend against tyrannical existences like the infernal tyrant and the magnetic mica jellyfish. Unfortunately, he couldn't understand anything at this level. It was just a blur. Luo Nan's state of mind was still quite stable. There were many things he couldn't understand in this mystical game scene constructed by the simulator of the inner universe. But as long as the disparity in the flow of time existed for a long period of time, he would have a lot of time to study it. Ha! A marvelous scene suddenly appeared in the space of a thought. Luo Nan saw two of himself. One was sleeping in a spacious bedroom. The entire scene was frozen like an engraving. The other was standing in a narrow cabin. His movements weren't big, but every instant presented a dizzying abundance of detail. The clear directionality of the scene made Luo Nan quickly realize that this was him in reality and in the game. Sure enough, the flow of time on both sides was different. But then again, he could feel from the instantaneous cross-section that the difference wasn't particularly shocking. It was somewhat contrary to the conclusion deduced by logic. Or perhaps they were converging. Luo Nan's thoughts were a mess. The scene returned to nothingness. But he finally understood what he needed to understand. From this moment onwards, the time he spent in the game scene was clearly restricted by the true environment of Earth's spacetime. He was about to reach his limit. Luo Nan didn't know whether or not this situation would cause confusion for Shang Min, so he put on an appearance of awe-inspiring righteousness. But before he could finish speaking, his mind stirred and he blurted out, "Air attack. Be careful." At nearly the same time, the various channels that Luo Nan was in rang densely with air attack alarms. Chapter 935. Luo Nan had completed a brilliant early warning. This was the specialty of the mental side, but it wasn't easy to do in the current situation. It was difficult to release soul strength into the void, and it could be wantonly extended. Luo Nan was able to deduce the corresponding signs from the details of the conflicting laws of the three sides. Then he captured the corresponding target. The pterosaur army was mobilized by the magnetic mica jellyfish regardless of the cost. They forcefully broke through the blockade and made a suicidal attack in the direction of the blocking position. Some of them displayed the characteristics of the assault beetles. When their broken bodies swept past the canyon area at low altitude, they brought with them raging flames. Every time they spat out acid bombs, they would also catalyze the most insidious flames. It was like a rapid rain of fire that was blown by the wind, pouring down on the defensive line. The outer cabin of the freezing device was still at the outer edge of the fortress. Of course, it was within the range of the rain of fire. However, the damage of the rain of fire was dealt with by the defensive system of the blocking position. Luo Nan didn't need to worry about it. From his perspective, there was nothing more realistic than the fact that his early warning still had some errors, in a relatively higher-level domain. Earlier than the pterosaur air raid, a heavy magnetic spirit hammer fell from the sky. It was a powerful attack from the main body of the magnetic mica jellyfish. Luo Nan wasn't clear on the specific mechanism of the magnetic spirit hammer, but he was able to observe and sense the surrounding laws and environment the moment the strike fell. It was as if he had been struck by a stun grenade. All order was distorted and turbulent. This caused a considerable negative effect on the defensive system of the blocking position. This was clearly a targeted method of the magnetic mica jellyfish. However, who could be more brilliant than the other in a prolonged confrontation? The Bloodshed Land had many contingency plans to deal with this situation. After a short period of shock, the entire outer wall of the fortress lit up with pure light. This layer of light was a bit similar to the format of fire. In fact, it was the representation of a myriad of preset configurations that circulated and switched and reassembled. It formed an effect close to an energy shield. It blocked a large portion of the most destructive and corrosive of the rain of fire. At the same time, it suppressed the warping power of the mad magnetic spirit hammer. The two sides went back and forth, calmly dealing with each other. It was quite marvelous. Luo Nan originally loved this sort of scene the most. However, his energy had declined, and he had a headache. He really had a headache. The confrontation between the two sides had escalated, and the intensity had increased. This meant that the flow of information, which had been relatively flat before, had suddenly risen to a new level. And it wasn't just one level, but several levels. Countless variables were added in the blink of an eye within Luo Nan's range of perception. It involved the immediate responses of the Bloodshed Land, the magnetite mica jellyfish, and the Hellfire Tyrant. Even if the Hellfire Tyrant could be ignored for the time being, the scale of the first two changes was no different from a nuclear bomb explosion in terms of information volume. And they all involved Luo Nan's current observations. They all touched upon the domain that Luo Nan was still in. The changes brought about more references. Luo Nan could see more, but he also had to bear more. The water level of his energy dropped again. Luo Nan didn't even have the strength to stand against the wall. It was also at this moment that he finally understood, apart from the benefits of the flow of time inside and outside, which had to be built on a foundation of high consumption, wasn't the Innerverse simulator's analysis, deduction, and simulation of high-level laws the same? The wool comes from the sheep's back. In the end, wouldn't Luo Nan have to support all the expenses alone? A large-scale conflict of this scale involved two sovereign-level fantasy breeds, as well as the bloodshed domain framework of the same level. The simulation of the three high-level laws needed to be synchronized. The Innerverse simulator, which was Luo Nan, really could not hold on any longer. Luo Nan. This was Lieutenant Shang Min's call. The changed environment of the rules had caused a few variables to appear in the work of the transfer, which was practically set in stone. This was within her expectations, but Luo Nan, who had always been quick-witted, was clearly slower by half a beat when it came to debugging the transfer equipment. She had no choice but to be sensitive. "How are you?" The question was superfluous, but it reflected the change in Lieutenant Shang Min's attitude toward Luo Nan. Hearing Shang Min's call, Luo Nan struggled out of his trance of energy exhaustion. Without any hesitation, he activated the strengthening element storage inside the exoskeleton armor and completed the injection. But he could guess the result. It was probably meaningless. Sure enough, even though Luo Nan's physical strength instantly exploded in this host within the game scene, the soul strength supporting the operation had already been extracted from its roots, consumed. How could it be so easy to replenish? Luckily, Luo Nan already knew how to deal with it. He withdrew most of his scattered telepathic senses and forced himself to stop pondering over the high-level evolution laws of the bloodshed land and the magneto-optical mica. He only kept the necessary links to deal with the current work. Though his energy reserves did not improve, they no longer worsened. Luo Nan could finally catch his breath. It seemed that Luo Nan just needed to fall back. He would fall out from the boundary between the two, realizing his return. It was at this time that he heard Lieutenant Go Yi yell in the channel. "Shadow cockroach." Chapter 936. Shadow Cockroach. Luo Nan should have seen this name or a similar name in the database related to the Outer Realm species. However, he no longer had the space to recall. He was unable to make a further reaction. His energy had already been squandered on the support and analysis of the high-level evolution of the laws. He had a bit of energy left over to deal with the killing move of the shadow cockroach that sliced through the void. He had indeed blocked the first wave of death. The dozens of syncopators on the ground had already turned to slag. They had blocked the disaster in place of Luo Nan, Lieutenant Shang Min, and Sir Shi Yuan. But the second wave. Luo Nan watched helplessly as the shadow cockroach's main body appeared in the void. It was just like an extended wraith. It wanted to swallow the freezing device, the outer cabin, and the three people involved in the critical moment of the connection in one gulp. A powerful light exploded in this area at this moment. Fortunately, Luo Nan was wearing a full helmet and a metal visor. The light particles were filtered, and Luo Nan's eyes only blurred for an instant. Then the panoramic simulation's field of vision was restored to normal. There was just a bit of thermal noise brought about by the powerful light. Most importantly, there was still a bit missing. Shang Min's calm voice rang out, the flash ray hit. The shadow cockroach construct disintegrated. F***CK. How the F***CK did you do that? Xian Zhu's Tianyuan style of foul language spread wantonly in the channel. Luo Nan really wanted to learn from him. Who could explain why the terrifying fantasy breed, which could easily tear apart the void, was reduced to ashes after a wave of powerful light passed through? This shock even gave him a new stimulation. It made his mind forcefully pull itself together. He glanced at the virtual interface of his left eye and saw the timely short information explanation, shadow cockroach, an outer realm species. When entering other planes of space and time, there is a high probability that it will tear apart the structure of space and time. It will react with the invaded environment to form a construct. Shadow cockroach is relatively weak and fears strong light. Luo Nan's head grew dizzy. Looking at this explanation, it seemed. Well done. Shangmin turned her head in the midst of pressing matters and spoke to Luo Nan. Xian Zhu's emotional reaction just now wasn't directed at Shangmin, who was executing according to the drill manual. It was because of Luo Nan's forceful closing of the space-time rift. Unfortunately, Luo Nan was destined to be unable to answer him. It could be said that Luo Nan didn't think at all in that instant. It was completely out of instinct. He used the syncopator to mobilize all the configuration modules in the surroundings that could be used. He probably made a small-scale space-time barrier. He really didn't have any recollection of it. In that state of his, the structure of time and space that he depended on was torn apart, and his entire body was about to collapse. How could he have the time to think calmly? Luo Nan's train of thought became more and more erratic. Otherwise, he wouldn't have wasted precious time on Xian Zhu's rather untimely reaction. Of course, the current stage of Luo Nan's focus was far too demanding. Luo Nan was able to control his upper and lower eyelids from fighting. It could already be said that his willpower was firm. The changes in the situation did not change according to his state and will. Instead, they happened one after another, axle 2, speed limit to 4. Shangmin's concise instructions were transmitted into Luo Nan's mind, which completely conformed to the norms of the drill manual. Luo Nan shuddered once more, and his muddled consciousness found a direction for the time being. At this moment, he couldn't even move a hair from head to toe. If he really tried to do it, he would probably fall back to earth. It was only through thinking that he could roughly grasp the corresponding configuration structure and attempt to adjust the relevant equipment. However, Luo Nan was absent-minded for a moment. It seemed like he was missing something. Yes, there weren't enough syncopators. He had brought a base number of 132 syncopators, and right now, most of them had become scapegoats. They had turned into slag and scattered on the ground. Oh, if it wasn't enough, then it wasn't enough. In any case, he could do it. The corresponding thought only lasted for an instant. He didn't think too deeply before he put it into action. The frame of Luo Nan's body and soul interacted with the external vertical collar dynamo core. He transformed his own strength into electromagnetic waves and other material wavelengths. He controlled the remaining 40 or so syncopators and adjusted their positions within the cabin. They formed a relatively sealed force field structure, allowing his soul strength to shuttle within. This was the basic train of thought and requirements of the Heavenly Yuan Empire's military drill. Luo Nan still followed the basic train of thought, but the lack of material conditions made it impossible for him to completely conform to the standards of the drill. His operation was already pressing down on the safety line, but under these circumstances, he directly broke through the safety line. Unsurprisingly, the vertical collar dynamo core sounded an alarm and attempted to correct it. The problem was, even though Luo Nan was extremely weak and had reached the limits of his physiology and mind at the same time, how could a mere external dynamo core be able to restrain him with his extraordinary attainments in soul strength? After entering the game scene, Luo Nan abided by the rules and obeyed the constraints. They were like casual graffiti, splashed paint, and randomly cut curtains. They spread out wantonly and boundless, filling one's field of vision. Accurately speaking, it was the entirety of all sensing dimensions. It didn't leave even the tiniest bit of space. And the other side was still closing in endlessly. It seemed to want to completely stuff this extreme chaos into Luo Nan's eyes and all of his cognition. Luo Nan was startled to the point of sobering up a bit. The polar domain. This sort of thing that was like a rag. Luo Nan found it hard to accept this sort of filthy and absurd thing. It was related to the deep and empty polar domain that he had always known. But the reality was that this chaotic and filthy element occupied the highest point of the mental plane. It was located above the abyss region and the sea of consciousness. And it was still endlessly seeping down, affecting the abyss region, affecting the sea of consciousness, affecting every region and every individual. Including Luo Nan. Luo Nan's body seemed to be covered in filth in just the limited amount of time that had passed with clairvoyance. It was as if his soul strength had been soaked in filthy, stinky water. It had lost its clarity and spirituality. A feeling of vexation and nausea exploded in the depths of his heart. Luo Nan wanted to close his eyes and not look, but in the instant he avoided, countless eyes filled with indescribable emotions focused on him. It seemed that he was also one of them. It was as if he was looking at a mirror that had been severely graffitied. Or perhaps this mirror itself was pieced together from countless eyes. Luo Nan still had to strive to find a reason for this encounter in his current state. This chaos really broke through the limits of what he could endure. The problem was that his efforts were quickly drowned out. The chaotic logic continued to expand endlessly. Luo Nan was nearly convinced that he was already splitting apart, observation and feeling had been severed. Thinking and imagination ran in opposite directions. Even his instincts were at a loss within this chaos. A sharp alarm rang out at this time. Luo Nan groaned miserably, but his consciousness extracted a bit from the chaos. He made a vague judgment. It wasn't from the relay station. It came from the simulator of the inner verse. Then, before Luo Nan could hear the specifics of the information, everything before his eyes suddenly went black. It was as if the system had crashed on a black screen. It didn't reboot. It was good that it didn't reboot. Luo Nan let out a breath of relief. Cold sweat had already drenched the hair on the back of his head. His heart was beating at a rate that was about to ignite a fire within his internal organs. This was vile poison. Vile poison pollution. Luo Nan locked onto this answer almost immediately. But just as this concept became clear in his mind, the chaotic mess and filth that could drive a person insane appeared once more on the black screen that erased all information. It was deeply engraved in his eyes and in his heart. Just its existence alone was enough to cause one's heart to palpitate with fear. F***ck me. Luo Nan's body bounced up and he waved his hand with force. He wanted to wave away these things that were even more vexing than flies in the darkness. Luo Nan waved his arm twice and suddenly woke up. He was truly awake this time. A thin quilt slid down from his body. The quiet and spacious room carried the soft sound of water. He was wearing an exoskeleton armor, withstanding the rain of fire from the sky, and the battlefield environment where many channels of information interweaved. Chapter 937. Luo Nan had already exited the game. However, he didn't even have the time to sigh about anything. The sin poison, that chaotic and dirty elemental energy, wantonly revealed its presence and continued to permeate him. Actually, Luo Nan knew very well in his heart that this was just a fragment of an impression that existed in his memories. There was no real impact to speak of. But it was precisely because there was no substance to it that it lingered and did not disperse. This was what made Luo Nan even more irritated. He forcefully flung the thin blanket on his body to one side, as if he could use this method to completely separate himself from the mess and filth. Of course, it was useless. My lord. Luo Nan was in the master bedroom. Snake Tongue's figure was reflected outside the bamboo lattice door. Her tone was a bit hesitant. She seemed uncertain. Luo Nan didn't feel like replying to her. He continued to fight against the corrosion of the chaotic and disorderly impressions. His breathing grew heavier and heavier. 2 seconds passed before the door was pushed open to the side. The sound of wood rubbing against each other was extremely soft and slow. But in Luo Nan's ears right now, it was clearly the most torturous noise. He immediately glared at him angrily. Snake Tongue, who was walking in on her knees, suddenly raised her head and met Luo Nan's gaze head-on. Snake Tongue was startled, and then her body tensed up. She sucked in a short breath, and her mouth emitted a loud and clear sound of air. For someone with her temperament, this was already an extreme loss of self-control. The more she acted like this, the more she attracted Luo Nan's attention. Luo Nan stared at Snake Tongue with a fiery rage. Snake Tongue subconsciously wanted to bend her head to avoid his stare, but it seemed that her movements were too large. She stretched her neck, causing her body to go stiff. She couldn't move sideways. It was also as if invisible fingers were pinching her cheeks. She couldn't move freely. "What's your name?" Luo Nan's voice was dull and hoarse. His voice sounded like dry wood scraping against each other. Snake Tongue couldn't answer. In fact, she couldn't even control her eyelids right now. She wanted to close her eyes, but she could only shake her eyelashes. Soon, the veins on her fair neck and forehead began to bulge and throb slightly. In the end, his entire body was trembling, as if he had seen something extremely terrifying, or perhaps he had been forcefully injected with a fatal poison. "You've seen something incredible from me. You can even infect me like this," Luo Nan muttered. Even he himself couldn't hear his muffled voice too clearly. This wasn't a good thing. This was because he could feel that as Snake Tongue was struck, the chaotic and dirty elements suddenly expanded their territory. Many more irregular transformations occurred, making the chaos even more chaotic and harder to control. What the hell? Luo Nan was watching Snake Tongue's destruction. Wasn't he the same? In a certain sense, Snake Tongue was a reflection of his own state. The two of them were grasshoppers tied to the same rope. Both of them were falling apart at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then, they completely merged into the extreme chaos and disorder. It was like Luo Nan was sitting in reverse for a certain instant. Everything he experienced, everything he remembered, everything he learned, and everything he cultivated. This included the learning and harvests he gained from the game setting, the growth and advancement he gained from fighting against the Amaterasu Order, the large profits he earned from killing Gong Chi, the explosive increase in his soul strength after erecting the spiderweb of the altar, and even the primordial foundation bestowed upon him by the formatting theory system. The strict assembly of order collapsed one after another, returning to meaningless chaos. It no longer mattered whether this was an illusion or reality. If Luo Nan truly believed it, then the barrier between reality and illusion would be as fragile as a bubble. Of course Luo Nan didn't want to believe it. He only had a bit of reason left, and he was still struggling. He tried to return to his rightful position and let order dominate everything once more. But his attempts were drowned in the chaotic and misplaced thoughts and emotions. He failed time and time again. Every time he failed, he would cut off a large chunk of the structure of order, throwing it into the abyss of chaos. It wasn't just Luo Nan himself who was affected in the span of a few breaths. The living starry sky, the large production line, the spiderweb of the altar, and other mental world structures he had built upon the foundation of formatting theory were shaking as well. The destructive power of sin poison was attempting to pollute and destroy everything in one fell swoop. If Luo Nan's soul strength hadn't been exhausted and completely shrunk, then the entire earth would have fallen in the blink of an eye with the range his soul strength could cover. The sin poison was temporarily unable to spread, but Luo Nan's foundation had collapsed. What would happen to the other people attached to his system? Luo Nan was already unable to consider such a complicated problem. He was lucky enough to be able to analyze the situation before his eyes. But at this moment, something unexpected popped up. The Wraith Sign. This projection incarnation of the demon watched as the altar spiderweb that it was clinging to moved toward decay. Instead, it screamed noiselessly amidst the collapsing chaos. It was particularly excited, but it was unknown whether it was fear or joy. Or perhaps it was praise for the nature of chaos. This fellow. Luo Nan didn't understand. How did he suddenly notice the wraith sign? How did he have the leisure to pay attention to such details? But it was precisely this leisure that drew out a bit of his extremely chaotic state of mind. It was like a sewer pipe that was stuffed full of filth. A gap suddenly burst open, but it didn't immediately clear up. Instead, Luo Nan heard a muffled echo. It was a faintly discernible rumble that soon became clear and distinct. Walala, walala. Chapter 938. The Heavily Chained Crow. The materialization of the rules of formatting theory, my heart's a prison, was the embodiment of control and coercive power. It was also Luo Nan's original foundation. When Luo Nan's extraordinary power sprouted, it became the most special symbol. It was preserved at the very bottom. As Luo Nan's power level continued to rise, his accumulated techniques grew richer and richer. He rarely used the power of the heavily chained crow. At most, he used it to control the wraith sign. And now, when everything was withering, decaying, and collapsing, the heavily chained crow appeared once more. It still maintained its fixed form. It still continued to maintain its rhythm and meaning. It still firmly locked the wraith sign. No matter how deranged it was, it wouldn't cause a backlash. Luo Nan took in a long breath. His wildly beating heart seemed to be tied up by chains. From his perspective, it was better than nothing. The unchanging nature of the heavily chained crow was the most obvious lighthouse amidst the avalanche of chaos. It allowed him to have a bit of a sense of direction amidst the vast expanse of chaos. He wouldn't be completely lost. Such an effect was absolutely not an exaggeration to say that it was a cornerstone, a stabilizing needle. Why did it have this kind of effect? This scene felt a bit familiar. Luo Nan's consciousness drifted once more, but it was no longer a depraved loss of control. Instead, he used the manic wraith sign and the stable heavily chained crow as primers. He made a reasonable association and completed a jump with a clear direction. Suddenly, a grand image appeared out of nowhere. No, this wasn't just an image. It was a complex movement that pierced through the barrier of space and time. It cut into the tree-hole space within the Mishti labyrinth. It connected with the lens and cast into the depths of the boundless sandstorm. It had a clear direction, and because its goal was clear, it quickly received a response. Luo Nan's consciousness broke free from the chaos. In the blink of an eye, it fell into an incomparably deep and grand world. Once again, he saw the abyss sun wheel and the absolute chain prison clashing against each other. They kept each other in check and balance. The dazzling abyss sun will expanded and shrunk at times. Flames gushed out, transforming into tens of thousands of demons. The heavily chained crow crisscrossed layer upon layer, resonating with a howl. The humming sound was no different from last time. This included the flood of information hidden beneath this magnificent scene. Observation meant contact, connection, and conduction. In an instant, the grand image that was merely a silhouette of the vast spacetime was shattered. The violent and warped dynamic changes and the flood of information hidden deep within the changes burst forth once more. The flood of information surged toward Luo Nan. Chapter 939. The red light illuminated a portion of the area, helping Luo Nan see order within the chaos. At the very least, he could try to understand what the internal conflict was like within the chaotic mist that pervaded the entire plane of consciousness. The heavily chained crow and the wraith sign were, of course, Luo Nan himself. They were located at the center of the chaotic mist. They made an elementary imitation of the imagery and laws of Sunwell Extreme Prison. Actually, they actively guided the power of Sunwell extreme prison to cross space and resist the corruption of sinful poison. Regardless of whether Luo Nan did it intentionally or not, this was an established fact. It was impossible for Luo Nan to utilize the power of Sunwell extreme prison, especially the roaring torrent of information, to cleanse the universe in one fell swoop with Luo Nan's control and analytical abilities. But when the primal chaos fog collided, a strange feeling gradually appeared. The filthy curtain that seemed to be rooted in Luo Nan's memories was washed back and forth by the torrent of information from Sunwell extreme prison. It was warped by an even more powerful power of distortion, to the point of being washed away. Though it still looked the same, Luo Nan became more and more familiar with it the more he looked at it. Luo Nan repeated the familiarity over and over again. It was like staring at a character and looking at it hundreds of times. Suddenly, it became unfamiliar. In reality, this was a kind of semantic saturation phenomenon. After the brain received the same stimulation over and over again, it produced a nervous fatigue that caused it to enter a state of inhibition. Luo Nan's current situation was pretty much the same. His brain nerves were far more than tired under the violent flood of information. They were simply overworked. With sinful poison as the central axis of stimulation, it gave him continuous attacks. If it were anyone else, they would have long since gone insane, gone mad, and their body and soul would have collapsed. However, Luo Nan had a layer of chaotic mist as a buffer. He forcefully withstood over 100 waves of attacks, holding on to the point of nervous suppression. His ability to distinguish and associate dropped substantially. He was unable to absorb the destructive power of sinful poison's law distortion. He could only pay attention to a portion of its structure. The problem was, when he looked at it this way, why did he feel that the other side was more handsome? Suddenly, Luo Nan discovered a new world. The environment of laws created by sinful poison was admittedly chaotic to the extreme, but it seemed that it could be disassembled. His analytical ability hadn't reached the level where he could immediately see through the mysteries. Snake Tongue's complexion wasn't as pale as before. However, she had been acting as Luo Nan's test subject for the past few days. Her energy was lacking, and now she encountered this matter. She was caught in the crossfire, and she was in a worse state than Luo Nan. Her back could no longer support itself. She couldn't straighten her body. She was half lying on the ground, on the verge of collapse. Luo Nan couldn't help but feel a bit guilty when he saw her appearance. He got up and walked over. He asked warmly, "Are you feeling a bit better?" Snake Tongue heard this and forcefully propped her body up. Luo Nan was both admiring and a bit amused when he saw her appearance. "I'm afraid your luck has been exhausted up in the clouds. These days really haven't been easy. People always lacked self-awareness in times like this." Snake Tongue's eyes were half closed, and her pupils tilted to the side. She did her best to keep her voice steady and not trembling. "I've disturbed my lord's ocular technique cultivation. It's my fault." "What cultivation?" "Ocular technique." Luo Nan was startled with a laugh. He suddenly had some thoughts. He pointed at his eyes. "Here." Fortunately, Snake Tongue was able to understand his meaning. Her eyelids drooped, and she spoke in a soft voice, "My lord's divine ability." Luo Nan only knew that Snake Tongue had been infected by him, but he didn't have the time to review the channel of infection. If it was really as Snake Tongue said, then he could transmit the evil poison with just his eyes, causing the target to be contaminated. This really could be considered a type of ocular technique. Was his brain still sluggish? It wasn't easy for him to calm down, and now he had the guts to use the evil poison. The heavily chained crow and the new version of the wraith sign structure must have made him arrogant. Luo Nan really wanted to knock himself on the head and let his reason occupy a high position once more. But this thought was born, and his mind was like a cat scratching at it. He had glimpsed some of the outline of the structure during the partial decomposition of the evil poison. The outline transformed into abstract lines that danced in his mind. His fingers twitched more and more fiercely. Luckily, Luo Nan didn't have the time to ponder this deeply. The distant signal was transferred and received by the external neuron. Zhang Yingying's voice came roaring over, "What the hell is going on?" There was a bang, and the signal disappeared. The ground was covered in mercury. "I nearly called the police, you scum." Hearing this, Luo Nan's smile, which had just calmed down, surged up once more. It carried a few absurd emotions of déjà vu, but these emotions were already real and controllable. Only now did Luo Nan truly feel the force field of the real world gently covering his body. He really had come out from the game setting. Even though he had been smuggled in by the evil poison, he could still see it. He was still alive, right? Luo Nan really wanted to say thank you to his grandfather. Thank you to his grandfather. It was his notebook that had laid down such an indestructible foundation for him. Of course, he also needed to thank the Sunwell Hell in the distant deep space. Luo Nan was becoming more and more convinced that it was very likely that it was the true source of formatting theory's power. Are you going crazy again? Speaking of which, we're going to land in 2 hours. Are you coming or not? I'm coming. Of course I'm coming. Luo Nan blurted out. He looked through the cabin's porthole to look at the color of the sky outside. He saw the sunset filling the sky. He looked at his watch again. It was already 6:00 in the evening in Ban City. Before he went to sleep, Zhang Yingying had told him the time. It was approximately 10:30 in the morning in Xia City. Ban City was an hour ahead of Xia City. This meant that he had slept for approximately 7 hours. And in the game setting, a total of at least 70 hours had passed. In other words, the difference in the flow of time had reached 10 times. It looked like he had profited, and it was a huge profit. The amount of time he could control, or even his lifespan, had been extended by 10 times in an instant. But Luo Nan pondered it carefully, especially when he looked at his own state, and he had some doubts. His soul strength was empty. His soul cloak had collapsed. The altar's spiderweb had decayed. Admittedly, these things could be regenerated, but for them to grow to such a scale was the result of Luo Nan's accumulation over the past few months. He had squeezed them dry in a short 7 hours. This sort of consumption made Luo Nan feel rather uneasy. There was also the uninvited evil poison. Even though it had been suppressed and a portion of it had been dealt with, could there really be no repercussions for existences on the plane of laws? Let's not talk about the excessively fictitious ones. There was the most realistic one. Luo Nan had just promised Zhang Yingying that he would go meet up with them. Let's not talk about the real person. Even if it was his water vapor avatar, his soul cloak had collapsed. It was hard to avoid having to rack his brain again. Another period of awkward blankness passed. Zhang Yingying was convinced. Hello. You went on a mental journey again. Did you save the world in your dream? Did you win or lose? Say something. I nearly destroyed the world, it's true. Luo Nan responded with sincerity. He ignored Zhang Yingying's laughter and curses for the time being. He looked into the mental plane and grasped his own state. He began to seriously consider a plan to remedy the situation. It was strange. According to Luo Nan's usual way of thinking, he should be thinking in the direction of the mental plane, the soul cloak, the polar region of the abyss, and so on. He had done this before, and he had long since become familiar with it. But right now, the above directions and plans only ran through his mind, and he was unable to raise any interest. Admittedly, part of this was due to Luo Nan's large amount of soul strength and the accumulation of his framework being annihilated in a puff of smoke. But there was an even greater factor. Luo Nan felt that there wasn't much technical content. Speaking of which, Luo Nan had spent 70 hours in the game setting. He had already fiercely raised the aesthetic level of the configuration design and application. Yes, the Heavenly Yuan Empire didn't have a purely mental configuration application. But the strict, systematic, and highly efficient configuration model was deep and enchanting. Once one touched upon the basics and experienced the richness of its contents, one would be unable to stop. Hello. Hello. Luo Yuan, why, this attitude of yours won't do. Luo Nan's soul was called back by Zhang Yingying. But this allowed his pure aesthetic impulse to take the upper hand. He responded with a sound and then smeared honey on his mouth. Sister Yingying, I want to ask you something. Do you have any processing tools over at the airship? Do you have a fever? The small misunderstanding didn't affect Zhang Yingying's ability to understand. I'll give it to the boss right away. Don't worry. With my understanding of the boss, a toy of this level isn't a problem. All right. Thank Her Majesty Empress Wu on my behalf. Luo Nan didn't know if Her Majesty Empress Wu was by Zhang Yingying's side right now, but he still had to say what needed to be said. He reminded her in the end, notify me when you're done. There's still the assembly segment. I'll need your help then. No problem. You don't need to worry about time. At most, I'll notify the cockpit and have them circle around the Pacific Ocean a few more times. Oh my. I owe you a favor. It's good that you know. Go on your knees. Go. Luo Nan really wasn't good at being talkative. He could only retreat in defeat. But speaking a few more words always made his mood a bit better. He laughed as he hung up the call, but he soon restrained himself a bit. Her Majesty Empress Wu's face flashed before his eyes. It was uncertain. Luo Nan pondered for a moment and tossed these thoughts to the back of his mind for the time being. He contacted Yin Lu again. Yes, this was done through the external neuron adapter wristband. Yin Lu clearly wasn't used to this sort of method. She asked probingly, Mr. Where are you? I'm on the front deck. I'll be right there. Okay, no need. I'll send you a set of blueprints. Give it to the Master Guard and have them work on it as soon as possible. The materials are divided into two types, skeletons and metals. We need 2 of each. No, 4 base numbers. The specific number and requirements are all written on it. At this moment, Luo Nan thought of the external module of the Frozen Alive installation. He learned from the previous example of a shortage of syncopators, so he casually doubled the number. Yin Lu had just responded when Luo Nan said, there's also T-City. It's more convenient for you to make arrangements. Prepare some as well. T-City. Ah, yes. Is the same number okay? It's enough. Luo Nan didn't want to bother Her Majesty Empress Wu too much. Moreover, the materials for the water crystal were worrisome based on the data. Luo Nan could only deal with it temporarily. In the end, he needed to return to a mature material plan. After giving these instructions, Luo Nan casually asked, how's the situation over at T-City? You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.